Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Mastodon, titled Once More Round the Sun. Okay, here's a trend amongst some music fans that really pisses me off. When they say that they hate, or they can't stand, or they won't listen to an entire genre of music except for one or two artists. And believe me, this is a lot more common than you might think. How many people have you ever encountered say, "Oh, I hate rap, but I listen to Eminem or Drake," or "I can't stand country, but you know Luke Bryan or the band that did that Cruise song, they're okay," or "I won't listen to metal at all, but you know AC/DC and Metallica, they're good, you know, I like them." Now this tends to happen to metal a lot more often than the other way around, mostly because to some extent, metal and harsher music in this vein, they're still somewhat considered as outsider genres, particularly with the decline of rock radio. Metal doesn't have the vast mainstream cultural defining appeal right now of hip-hop or EDM or even country, at least right now on the radio, and that means that the genre tends to get cherry-picked by folks who only catch the few metal songs that manage to cross over onto mainstream radio, or some token appreciation of the great so they don't come across as ignorant. And you know what? In my opinion, that's absolute garbage, because it is entirely a position taken out of ignorance. How the hell do you know you can't stand metal until you hear more of than just what crosses over? How do you know you don't like the rest of the big four if you only like Metallica? How do you know you don't like Nightwish or Within Temptation if you only like Evanescence? There are plenty of entry points in the metal genre, that's what I'm saying, and it's infuriating to see the genre so marginalized and treated reductively by people who just won't go further out of the comfort zone. Yeah, I'm gonna say it. The problem here, it's you. Oh, so okay. Why rant about this at all? Might seem a little bit pointless, right? Well, for the longest time, the beachhead metal band that got accepted by the indie pitchfork reading crowd was Mastodon. And the more I think about it, the more that this band becoming the critically accepted jump-on point for hipsters makes little to no sense to me. Sure, they're critically acclaimed, and they deserve it, but Mastodon land on the border between progressive metal and sludge metal, two genres that aren't exactly easy nuts to crack, with time signature bending melodies, punishingly heavy tones, and complex drum and guitar progressions. Oh, and also on that note, Mastodon are goddamn nuts, and I mean that as a high compliment. A band known for free association lyrics and concept records that are absolutely bonkers by conventional standards of storytelling. They're not your typical metal band, that's what I'm saying. And yet, all that seemed to change a little bit with the 2011 album titled The Hunter, their most accessible album to that date, at least in the mainstream, and also for me, their least interesting. Now, I'm not calling the record bad, because it's not, and there are certainly plenty of moments on that album that I really liked, but the choice to opt for a mid-tempo pace, simpler melodies, and much cleaner vocals saw a lot of their songwriting come into sharper view on that record, and, well, look, it lacked a certain visceral punch for me. What made early Mastodon records so striking was their almost simplistic word choice. It lent the albums a certain primal rage to use such precisely chosen words. And with The Hunter, the lyrical shift here just did not click for me as well. But with some interviews suggesting that their newest album is going to be circling back to some of their older material sonically with their new album Once More Around the Sun, I was curious to see how this new album was coming out. With some guarded expectations, but I hope for the best. So, did Mastodon manage to recapture some of their former success? Well, to some extent, I think they did. But you know what? I can't help but feel just a little bit underwhelmed by this record, especially in comparison with their earlier material. It is a better album than The Hunter, don't get me wrong. And for the most part, I still really liked Once More Around the Sun. But it's only a pretty damn good record when it could have been a great one. And honestly, that's a little bit exasperating for me. In other words, I want to like it a fair bit more than I do, even though I do think it is a good step in the new direction that Mastodon are looking to pursue. And you know what? It is definitely a new direction at this point, because at this point, Mastodon seems to be wanting to directly walk the line between commercially accessible hard rock radio and the more progressive material of their earlier years. And honestly, for a band that has a gift for such incredibly catchy and accessible melody lines and keeping their experimental elements actually cohesive, this isn't a bad choice for the band. Now for me, the melodies that really struck me were the minor chord saturated punch of Tread Lightly, helped by a great deal by the jangling acoustic acoustic strumming in the intro, which I really liked, the prog-inspired progression of Asleep in the Deep, the thick melodic riffs of Halloween, with some really great fast-paced bass work, and the explosive crunch of High Road. And as always, it's all anchored by Brand Daler's experimental and textured drum work that adds a ton of pummeling moments to this record that I just really loved. And it's really nice to see some of the more experimental elements coalesce really well too. The spacey synths, courtesy of guest Ike Owens, they're a great touch to Asleep in the Deep that I really appreciate. And the guitar tonal switch-ups on Halloween for the solos, that's pretty damn awesome too. I like those as well. Now that said, there are two production elements that did irk me a little bit. The first being the attempts to vary up some of the vocal production with fade-in elements on the mother load, or some of the grimier vocal filters used, which felt both unnecessary and unwanted, especially when the band's vocals have long ago proven to be appropriately visceral, and on songs like Feast Your Eyes, the vocal track just felt submerged to me. Now granted, they were preferable to the female crowd vocals on Aunt Lisa, which really just lacked the force and punch to really balance out with the rest of the track. Now, a larger issue I had was with the lead guitar at points, just feeling a little bit drowned out by some of the rhythm guitars. Maybe it's just a matter of some of the tonal choice, but if you're gunning for more melodic, hook-heavy, hard rock and metal, this should not be happening. Your lead guitar, lead melody, it should be the first thing in your mix, and that should not be getting buried. But then again, the more I kept listening throughout this record, the less I'm sure that this was part of Mastodon's plan. And some of this comes down to the vocals, which ran between more clean singing as you would expect, the guttural roars that defined early Mastodon, and even some shrieked vocals, all of which had the charisma and power that always distinguished Mastodon, even some of the shriek vocals I haven't heard in a while. The constant shifts in vocal production, depth, and style, though, did make for a slightly uneven listen, but you know what, for the most part it worked. What it did seem to reflect, though, is which songs would be pushed to radio, and which would be saved for the old school fans like myself. And it made me wonder a little bit, if Mastodon was going for a more cohesive project, it might have suited them a little bit better just to pick one style and just stick with it all the way through. And on that note, I'd be remiss not to mention the rather abrupt endings that many of these songs have on this record. Now, Mastodon have always been known for mid-song shifts in tempo and time signature, but these struck me as more of just ending the song precisely when the ideas ran out, not a graceful ending. It just made some of the songs come across as clipped to me. Now, thankfully, there do seem to be more cohesion in the ideas brought to the table on this record than on The Hunter, which takes us to lyrics and themes. Now, Mastodon have gone on record saying that this album is more about exploring the concepts of depth and the inexorable passage of time. And you know what? To their credit, the lyrics do a fairly solid job capturing some of the emotional depth behind some of these concepts, albeit with an odd confrontational edge to a couple of these songs, with Mastodon almost placing demands for realism and courage in the face of darkness on their audience, even against forces that they and their audience might not be able to fight that just must be implacable. Songs like the Shakespearean Chimes at Midnight, the paranoid Asleep in the Deep, the desperation of Ember City, and the eerie darkness of Halloween, they add a lot of color to how one deals with that sort of inevitable darkness, or even if you can deal with it. What I really like about this record is that it doesn't shy away from some of the uncertainty and almost vulnerability that comes with death and the passage of time and the acknowledgement of that, focusing most on when they do go into that good night, they'll do so on their own terms and do it in their own way. And I kind of like that. That's a good theme to run with. Now, that being said, lyrically, this album doesn't quite have the visceral punch of previous Mastodon releases. And it's in the songwriting where the gulf between hard rock and metal is most defined. Like with The Hunter, the lyrics are more structured and more more flowing, but at the same time, they also ring as a little bit vague, lacking the immediacy and a wallop that used to characterize early Mastodon's work. Now, the most egregious example of this comes in the Mother Lode, which even by hard rock standards feels awfully close to a generic empowerment anthem, and I didn't want to hear that from Mastodon. On top of that, I'm not quite sure that some of the more structured lyrics work as well for some of Mastodon's more blunt form of songwriting, as it can make some of these songs come across as simplistic and lacking in a bit of description. But then again, this might just be the big prog metal side of me talking coming through, because you know what, I can't help but wish that this album actually took the whole passage of time motifs and fashioned into it a little bit more of a narrative or a richer concept, because as it is, just for me, it feels a little bit disjointed. So you know what, to pull this all together, Mastodon has the sound of a band that's trying to walk the line between hard rock and prog and sludge metal, and while this record is more consistent, well written, and hook-laden than The Hunter, I'm not quite sure that Mastodon has quite nailed the balance yet. The lack of a tighter concept leaves much of this record feeling a little bit unfocused to me, and leaving me feeling that for a band with so much instrumental expertise that they could push themselves a little bit further if they weren't aiming for mainstream radio. Now, that said, writing rock music for mainstream radio is often difficult in its own right, and I can't deny that Mastodon does bring a certain degree of instrumental heft and expertise to the table regardless. So with both those facts in mind, I'm giving this record a very solid 7 out of 10, and definitely a recommendation. And while I don't quite enjoy Once More Around the Sun as much as the earlier material, it's still great metal nonetheless, and it's definitely worth your time. So go ahead, check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. On July 10th, I'm going to be going back to 2013 and reviewing an album from that year. Either an album that I've already covered on my blog or one of my videos, or just an album that I might have missed sometime around there. So put your suggestions in the comments, and the album that gets the most suggestions over the past couple of videos will be the one that I choose. Submissions will close on July 4th on Independence Day, just so I have time to go through the back catalog of the artists and chose to make sure all my facts are straight. Otherwise, if there's any other albums coming out this year that you want me to take a look at, or if there's any other thing that I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'd be more than happy to hear it. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.